Now I'd like to go and introduce our next speaker for Food Talks, Tanya Fields. Tanya Fields is an inspiration to me. This is a woman who created her own organization called the Black Project. The Black Project seeks to create economic development opportunities that are addressed by food justice, which is of course the most important, because if somebody can't eat, how can they think? Seeks to create economic and environmental justice and public health mental issues by empowering underserved women of color through political education, the beautification of community space, urban farming, and holistic health programming. By creating equal access to these enriching experiences for underserved women of color, Black Project strengthens and empowers the entire society and definitely complicates the food system. A huge hand for Tanya Fields. Thank you.
So, good morning. My name is Tanya Fields, and I come to talk about Let Us Liberate. Let Us Liberate. And I'm sure that from looking at this title, one would think that maybe I was talking about some sort of angry lettuce coup d'etat, Braveheart style, that is storming the barnyard of their respective farmers looking for liberation from the constraints of agriculture. That is not what I mean. I mean, as a play on words, let us liberate, right? What does that mean, to let us liberate? So I really want for us to really dig deep today and think about, what does food security versus food sovereignty mean? Because there's a difference. Y'all do realize there's a difference, right? Show of hands, how many people know there's a difference between food security and food sovereignty? This is a smart group of people in this room today. I'm excited, right? So, FAO, which is Food and Agriculture Organization of United Nations, that sounds fancy, right? Says that food security exists when all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. I'm going to guess that just means that we should be able to eat so that we can think, so that we can play, so that we can breathe, so that we can be healthy, whatever that means. Because living in New York City, healthy is sort of subjective. There's no real definitive word as to what that means. One could argue living in New York City in and of itself is healthy. Unhealthy. I'm going to refer to my notes and y'all can just share that with me. I'm a bastion of professionalism right now. So, what does that mean, right? You can read them all. Who are we liberating and whom will we be liberating? Right? Many of us here in this room want to grow food. We want to eat good food. We want to create access to good food. We consider ourselves participants in the good food movement, right? Everybody here is somehow involved in good food, right? And we believe truly, deep down, way down in our psyche, that the rest is going to fall into place because it just has to fall into place, right? Well, that hasn't really been working for my hood, right? It's not falling into place. And I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but I really want to talk about food sovereignty. I want to talk about that thing and just sort of get down to the nitty-gritty of what that means, right? We use the terms food sovereignty and food security and food justice interchangeably, but it's not interchangeable, right? So we just went over what food security means. But I want to talk about food sovereignty, so I'm going to back up and I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am and how I got here. And then you'll see how that relates to a much larger picture, right? So, I'm a 31-year-old mom of 4 children. Share a picture. They're amazing. I even got the dog in there, right? Okay? I started an organization around economic development for women and youth called the Black Project. I have a car. I make my own money. Sometimes. However, this was not an easy road for me to travel. My story is not unique. It is the same as many other women in my community. I became a mom at 22. I was still in college and I had a 3-month-old baby. Okay? I was gentrified out of Harlem and I ended up in the Bronx. I didn't know anyone, I didn't have a lot of support. And like many who had never lived in the Bronx, I didn't come with an open mind and open heart. This wasn't some sort of anecdote that later I would tell my friends about how I lived in this neighborhood in the Bronx. No, I came out of resentment and I came there with fear. To me, the Bronx was just some place to live. It wasn't home. I was confronted with poor air quality, and that kept me inside with my young daughter, and expensive, low-quality food. I was on a budget, I was a full-time student, I was a low-wage earner. By the time my second daughter came 17 months later, it was so nice I wanted to do it twice, okay? My children were battling respiratory illnesses, and I was about 30 pounds heavier. That 30 pounds, I'm still struggling to drop. Looks good on me, right? So, see, it was easier and cheaper for me to be a dollar millionaire. I did not make that up. I swear to you, McDonald's did. That is Paul. He has a name. His name was Paul, the dollar millionaire. There was a whole ad campaign created around his fictional brother. Okay? Now, it was easier for me to go and be like Paul, the dollar millionaire, than to go to the grocery store and pick up a head of broccoli, which was about $2.99, and it had this beautiful blue fur coat. It was easier for me to be a dollar millionaire than to go and buy tomatoes that were on the brink of rotting or wilted salad in a bag. I struggled. I struggled as a mother with limited means of support. I struggled as a student. I struggled as an employee who wanted to be recognized as smart, talented, and worthy, but was instead seen as unmarried, marginally educated. See, I was going to a CUNY and at a Fortune 500 company. That's just not good enough, okay? And I was arrogant because I was a young, unmarried black woman who wanted to be recognized as smart and talented and rewarded for it. I struggled as a resident, surviving welfare, and a short stint with displacement. Let me just tell you, there's nothing worse than trying to tell your 5-year-old that we can't go home because the marshals locked you out. Needless to say, I was stressed out, worn out, put out. Food was trivial. If we ate, that was a good thing. I couldn't afford organic, and I didn't have an analysis on food. All I knew as a struggling mom is that we needed to eat, period. As I found myself breaking down under the weight of poverty, struggling, and impending poor health, I knew for the sake of my kids, I needed to make a change. I was definitely the stereotypical angry black woman. I was waiting for somebody to set me off, looking for it. And so what I needed to do instead was find some other outlet for that. I discovered Mothers on the Move in 2006, and my life changed. I realized I had more than what my other neighbors had. I had social capital, educational capital, and cultural capital. And you know what? I did have an analysis on food. I knew what I was eating was making me and my children sick. I knew it was making me fatter. I knew it wasn't what I wanted to eat. This was not the legacy of my ancestors. Processed food was not my culture. This was fairly simple to me. So here I was living in a community full of underdeveloped lots. There was a lack of fresh groceries and healthy restaurants, and people, primarily women and youth, were poor. I started small, started doing mommy and me yoga classes. After the classes, the women would talk, and the same themes kept coming up. The issues in terms of why people weren't able to make the mind-body-food connection was because they were stressed. They were under amazing restrictions, right? And the one thing that kept coming up were money, jobs, economics, okay? Families didn't have traditional meal times or work schedules. They didn't cook as much they would have liked to. And now I want to go back to that food sovereignty thing we were talking about, because these experiences informed how I was going to do this work, how I was just going to go past food security. Because my opinion is, if you're talking about creating a long-term movement for poor people, you better start talking about long-term economic development. If you don't, then you don't have them, because you're not talking about what they need, right? When we do this work, a lot of times we are doing this using the missionary ideology. We need to rethink that approach, because there is a paradigm that exists right now where there are the folks, a lot of times, and I know I'm about to offend some folks, but your well-meaning, Midwestern, usually white liberals come into a community and say, look, we brought good food. We've got butternut squash. We've got chard. We've got all these wonderful things, and we're going to help you get healthy. The reality is, people have what they need in their community, right? We don't need that paradigm, right? We don't need more food pantries. We don't need more food stamps. We don't need well-meaning Midwestern white folks using missionary tactics. We don't need to be pathologized, right? I hear a lot of stuff about slow food in my community. But a lot of my more affluent, wealthy white counterparts are not eating at home around that circular family table either, right? We don't need bigger chain grocery stores. We don't need diversity. We need inclusion, right? I'm not saying that these things aren't helpful. They are helpful. What I'm saying is that continuing down this road will continue the status quo paradigm. Diversity does not ensure inclusion. Let's go back to this idea of food sovereignty. It is the people's right to decide their own food and agricultural systems. This implies that they also would then need to reap the economic benefits of that. So we don't need Trader Joe's. We don't need Whole Foods. We need Tanisha and Tyrone to get access to the Capitol to open up something just like it, right? Because it's not enough for folks to come in and once again benefit off of poor folks and then leave with that money, because same paradigm, right? The tools of oppression have always included inaccessibility to land and theft of land. It has included the inaccessibility to food. This paradigm keeps people dependent and eventually docile. Sounds familiar? Anybody work in the hood? Right, we know what narrative I'm telling you. Right? So the hood needs, let's talk about what the hood needs. The hood needs better inclusive economic development opportunities to create food businesses. This means being able to open food businesses beyond the standard bodega. Not that there's anything wrong with the bodega. The hood needs accountability and follow-through that catalyzes local economic development that would increase disposable income that could then be used for better food purchases. The hood needs inclusion in decision-making. That means not just getting bodies in a room to discuss a plan that already had an agenda and key players, but in fact, seeking out those in the community to be the forefront and the decision makers. See, this good food movement is an impetus for so much. It has the potential to act as the impetus to shifting the social justice paradigm. I'm not being naive here, I truly believe this. This is a reality. We must all eat. We must all break bread, but we cannot come to the table to break bread under a structure that mirrors our current society. A society that normalizes whiteness, that grants privilege to some on the backs of others. A society that, even in its approach to equality, continues a paradigm of one group being the decision makers, while the other group continues to be the downtrodden, dependent upon the goodwill of others. Equality can be encapsulated in the Aboriginal saying, if you come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. Our equality is inextricably bound up in one another, like the roots funneling deep into loamy-rich soil. We seek to cultivate something that can be shared by all. We sit down at a collective table to not just extrapolate over the good food movement, but revolution. A revolution of peas and chard that results in liberation.
extremely inspirational, and it's why it's so important that we're all here today to be able to hear everybody's message and then to understand how we can all be making a better difference.